thank the organizers for this event. I want to just speak slightly from the vantage point of a HERE project which I've been running for the past 2 years called HERE Value, which is looking at the impact and value of the arts and humanities. And I expect in saying that, it's also with Netherlands, Norway, and ourselves. And in saying that, I want to make a particular case, and I was glad Minister Sherlock referred to it, is that I'm referring to the arts, humanities, and social sciences. And I will come back to that point again in a different context. But maybe referring to the initial point that Rob made, that is the primacy of the techno-science paradigm in terms of economic progress has been the defining characteristic of research policy over the last decades. It's not really a new paradigm, and to some extent it was particularly well articulated after the Second World War in the U.S. By Vannevar Bush, who was Roosevelt's head of the Office of Scientific Research and Development under, as I said, under FDR. And it became, in that sense, the way in which research has a role, has a purpose with respect to economic development. And it's that way in which science it would be privileged as long as there was a usefulness, has underpinned the social contract for structured research, structured funding, and between the scientific community and the broader public. And it's into that environment that we are now moving as we move into the arts and humanities, along with the greater sense of the political demand for wider transparency, accountability, requirements about demonstrating value, impact, and relevance, and the issues around value for money and what I would say return on investment or return on public investment, confidence to the investor. Clearly, the arts humanities are hot subjects, as the Australians would refer to it. Have a difficult time explaining this within the kinds of scientific discoveries. And within that utilitarian framework, it's particularly more difficult. And maybe one of the flaws lies in the over-reliance on a linear model of innovation, which overestimates the commercialization aspects, which is itself a bit of a myth, and underestimates the contribution of all disciplines, especially the hot subjects. The results are not easily codified as intellectual property, translated into new products and services, and rather than this linear single input-output kind of model to calculate results, effects are much more dispersed and wide, and there are myriad of them. So in a sense, what we could say is that research produces value which creates ripples through society in which its effect is not direct in the way in which it's measurable. And we might say that of a range of scientific discoveries as well. One way of which you might look at this is researchers at Los Alamos modeled 1 billion scholarly user interactions off the web, looking at the most significant academic publishers, the aggregators, and institutional consortium over 2 years, so from about 2007 to about 2009. And what the result shows is a beautiful picture, aside from all the dots that are looking a bit like the sky at night, but not simply clusters of humanities or humanities and social science disciplines and scientific disciplines, but more interesting, the interaction between the two and the way in which you observe medical and biological sciences interacting with the humanities and social sciences, and you've got much more of an overlay. And so maybe there might be a way of looking at this as the arts, humanities, and social sciences to use it in its widest sense as an underpinning science, in the same way as we look at underpinning technologies, and to really take a grasp at the way in which disciplines underpin each other. So in regard to the second question, sorry, that was the first question. In regard to the second one, what are the kinds of issues with regard to the current agenda? Well, when we look at I think Helen mentioned it's easier to explain certain kinds of discoveries. My example is often using, how do you explain research into 16th century cooking as opposed to solving cancer? I think from the public and policy point of view, explaining the benefits of hard subjects is much more difficult than it is in terms of some of the more technological ones, especially when you can see the gadget at the end of it. And it seems to me the onus is then on the practitioner if I could say, not just to articulate that value, but to demonstrate it. And there is an increasing importance of how we demonstrate it, of how we make a case and answer the basic research premise that we find with all research projects, the so what. When you read any piece of work and you're assessing any project that comes before you, the question I often ask is, so what? And that becomes the kind of an issue that we need to begin to look at in the context of how the disciplines begin to justify themselves, not in a way of which you're looking to establish why you should do things, but being much more upfront of it. Traditional methods of measuring quantity of the impact of research have tended to rely on very narrow methods around journal articles and citations. Again, the reference there. If we think of that as only the tip of the iceberg, what in fact we're measuring, or what in fact is produced in terms of research, is much wider, it's much broader, a wider range of types of outputs than we see in terms of just pure articles. We produce libraries, we produce bibliographies, we produce music, we produce policy documents, a whole range of things. And its impact is wider than simply looking at citations, which is what I've written and someone else has read. Again, it's getting beyond the academic community. And finally, the potential that exists for creative collaborations. What might that be like? I think there's often an admitted reluctance by researchers to engage with the kinds of questions that are out there that stakeholders, other policymakers are saying about why should we fund public research? What's the value of it? In fact, in many of the interviews that we conducted, many of the people said it wasn't clear what the value was, that the researchers were reluctant to engage, and there was often a disconnect between higher education and the real life of what was going on in the wider world, particularly in this case with regard to arts and humanities researchers. So it seems to me that there is an onus on researchers to make the case and not to hide in what it seems to me to often be a case of exceptionalism. Oh, but we're different. There seems in many cases that there's much more similarity across the disciplines. The hiding behind particular types of practice that are unique to maybe the arts and humanities is not actually very unique. The referencing to practice-based or studio-based in the arts area, and I could look at engineering or lab science is equally practice-based. So when we look at these, some of the examples that I'd like to look at, for example, is Nesta, which exists in the UK, which is about science and technology and arts innovation in which it has taken. And I would ask you to look at the kinds of work there on their website, the types of projects that are funded, and the way in which all the disciplines are working together to look at innovation across all disciplines in terms of both social, cultural, political innovation, cultural innovation, change in organizations, and change in organizational practice. And just as a final comment then, Ireland is almost unique in not formally recognizing the creative arts as a discipline of research. We continue in a way, and we tend to have a tension between different areas, and indeed between scientists and non-scientists, but also between the arts and humanities. And I think that we need to really move beyond that and recognize the value and contribution of all disciplines and recognize that they all have something to contribute, that the different methodologies and so on are equally supportive. Thank you.